Hello, as always, Masha tells the stories and welcomes you to the 11th episode of the podcast Film Grazia Artis, or just Film if shortly. Here I share tales that inspire and reveal unique experiences of creators, makers and lovers of all kinds. I hope you find this program interesting and encouraging whatever you do. Practice art, enjoy living and learning about other people's creativity, backgrounds and their efforts to disrupt oppression and invite reflection. In ever-evolving landscape of art, particularly modern, one of the most profound gestures an artist can make is not to create, but to throw into confusion, to interrupt stagnant space and perception in a way that unsettles, opens eyes, and reveals the truth. Artists who manipulate space physically, emotionally, politically invite viewers to engage in deeper forms of reflection, asking not just what is this, but why does this matter and how do I relate to it? In a world saturated with images and overwhelmed by noise, spatial disruption is a quiet form of resistance. By shifting what seems stable or inevitable, artists reveal new ways of perceiving reality, whether through the haunting textile remnants or the intellectual ripple of a single book under a solid wall. These interventions remind us that nothing is stable and everything, space, systems, emotions, and even history, is subject to change. To disrupt space is to open a question. To step into that space is to accept the invitation to reflect not just on art, but on what it means to live, to remember, and to imagine otherwise. Artists often disrupt space not merely to alter aesthetics, but to provoke deep reflection on existence itself. By unsetting the familiar, whether through shifting scale, breaking surfaces, or recontextualizing ordinary materials, they create moments where viewers pause, question, and reconsider. In the installation A Single Book Disrupts the Foundation of a Brick Wall, Jorge Méndez Blake inserts a single volume beneath a wall, causing a visible ripple. This quiet gesture suggests how one idea, one act of thought, can disrupt the rigid structures we assume are immovable. By placing one copy of The Castle written by Kafka under the first layer of a brick wall, suddenly causing the entire structure to arch. The displacement is minimal, barely noticeable at first, but the effect is striking. The work implies that one small idea, one quiet act of reading or writing, has the power to shift even the most rigid systems. The wall made of bricks can be perceived as the silence that tyranny demands, the conformity that despotism requires, but the book eludes the act of thinking, deep, independent, and critical, the most powerful tool against totalitarianism. Kafka's novel reminds us of a thought that encourages disobedience in the surroundings where choices are limited and over-controlled. Thinking disrupts control. When individuals begin to question what they are told, when they reflect on justice or injustice, and interrogate themselves about freedom and truth, they begin to resist, not always and not necessarily with weapons, but with ideas. A single thought can challenge an entire system. A person who asks, "Is this right?" or "Why must it be this way?" is already breaking the spell of oppressive logic. Thinkers, writers, poets, artists, journalists, philosophers, and even victims of the regimes have long been among the first targeted by harsh regimes, precisely because their thoughts open the minds of others. Rosa Luxemburg, George Orwell, Virginia Woolf, Hannah Arendt, Ivan Bunin, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Ian McEwan, Anne Applebaum, and many others have shown how inner freedom is the first step toward outer resistance. Thinking is multifaceted matter. It aims to search the meaning, sensing, emphasizing its plurality, dynamism, and emergence through relationships rather than predetermined fixation. Gilles Deleuze, for example, views it as a product of the will to power, not in domineering sense, but as the capacity for continuous creation and transformation, continuous thinking. This perspective has implications for understanding how individuals and societies create meaning, and how meaning can be explored and re-evaluated. Dubito ergo, cogito ergo sum, which translates to I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. This statement is central to René Descartes' philosophy, and we have learned it at school. It is often considered a first principle in resolving universal doubt. It suggests that the act of doubting one's existence is a sign that one is thinking, and the act of thinking implies that one exists. Yet, the truth is, not many truly apply this knowledge in real life, and this leads to scary turns in the history in many countries. Tyranny thrives on social insensitivity and numbness, inability to think on their own, but thinking is a form of speech, an act of courage. Even if it begins quietly, even if it never reaches a crowd, a single mind awakened can inspire another. And so, thought becomes a chain reaction, slow, often invisible, but ultimately capable of transforming the heavy brick wall that buries the entire castle, causing a ripple on the rust stonework. Similarly, Doris Salcedo installations often involving cracked floors or hand clothing turn empty space into sites of grief and memory, the sites of questioning. These disruptions ask, what lies beneath our sense of order? Whose stories are hidden in the cracks? Such spatial interventions are metaphors for consciousness itself. They remind us that reflection, like art, is an interruption, a break in repetition, a refusal to accept things as they are. Space is never neutral. The way objects are arranged or where a body is allowed to move reflects power, memory, and exclusion. Doris manipulates space to explore trauma and mourning, particularly around Colombia's history of political violence. In works like Shibboleth, she literally cracks the floor of the Tate Modern, creating a rupture that visitors must physically navigate. The gap is more than a sculptured gesture. It becomes a metaphor for societal fractures, colonialism, and the lines drawn between inclusion and exclusion. By disrupting space as monumental and historically sanitized as museum, Salcedo forces viewers to confront discomfort emotionally and bodily. Her use of textiles, worn furniture, and concrete within self-specific context turns architecture into testimony, creating environments where memory is not something passive, but something we must walk through. A single book, a single stitch, a shadow, or a void can become the entry point into new awareness. In this way, artists reveal that existence is like an eggshell. The human body is fragile, as well as life. Understanding such a simple though poignant truth knocks out illusions, particularly when you sense the scent of death in the air and differentiate the shades of dried blood on the cloth, fluttering like a flag. Or other conceptual works created by Mexican artist Teresa Margolles, who boldly confronts themes of violence, death, and the fragility of life, particularly within the context of conflict and systematic injustice in Latin America. Her art does not offer comfort, it demands awareness. With a background of forensic pathology, Margolles brings unflinching intimacy to death, using materials that carry both literal and symbolic weight. Water used to clean corpses, blood-stained fabric, and fragments from crime scenes. What else could we talk about? Once resounded in a tranquil Venetian palazzo during the Biennale in 2009. This question entitles the work, which seemed an utterly simple piece at first glance. The title even appeared expressing irony in the world numbed by violence. What else could we talk about? Now and then? What else could we talk about when people become tortured and killed? What else could we talk about when it's hard to find protection and there is nothing else worth talking about, whether we are in the Venetian Palazzo or in the streets of Mexico or in The Hague? What else could we talk about when violence is a language, when it has become so normalized, when death is woven into the fabric of everyday life? In confronting the distance between Mexico's reality and the serene setting of the art world, Margolles collapses the divide between political crisis and aesthetic space, where physically quiet installation remains emotionally devastating. It brings violence from the margins, Juarez, Sinaloa, the morgue, into space of art and privilege, demanding reflection, buzzing with uncomfortable thoughts, transforming the elegant surroundings of the Biennale into the quiet, haunting sight of mourning and pain, tragedy and injustice. The textiles, soaked in the blood of murder victims from Mexico, hung silently like banners. They are material witnesses from real crime scenes. They are artifacts of an ever-unfolding spectacle that carry enormous emotional weight, making the viewer acknowledge the bodies and stories erased from public view. Through their absence, Margolles demands presence, forcing us to recognize not just the dead, but our role in remembering, forgetting, or ignoring them. Our role in asking questions and the role of the question itself. She underlines discomfort as a trigger to change. When we feel discomfort, something in our environment, our thinking, or our way of being is asked to be examined. This tension creates an opening, a moment where routine is interrupted and reflection becomes possible. In isolation, in numbness, when it seems that there is no hope, thoughts, questions, reflections that discomfort disrupt the machinery of repression, empowering individuals to imagine alternatives to oppression. It keeps alive the possibility of truth, freedom, and justice, even in the darkest political climates. Even in the powerlessness of the individual, even in the absurdity of the world, even in the unfinished stories, even in the total injustice. In such places, to think means to resist, to think means to question, and to think means to hope. In the communities where everyone is thinking alike, it is obvious that no one is thinking, since being critical, thinking critically can disrupt the status quo and challenge conventional reasoning, which can be beneficial for innovation and problem-solving, for causing a change. And sometimes, that one thought is enough to shift the entire wall. Just imagine how the world looks beyond it, and so, even in the darkest times, our single question can become the first crack in silence, in a solid monolith. Let's take a look, breathe in the new air, admire, and I will be back soon.